Well, the possibility of a relentlessly stupid person becoming president of the United States has been underexplored by screenwriters. And then Donald Trump came along and went far beyond what Hollywood could ever imagine in the presidency. Prior to Donald Trump, the challenge for screenwriters and fiction writers would have been, first of all, how could a profoundly stupid person be elected president of the United States? And then, how could a profoundly stupid person get through a day on the job as president? The fictional president, played brilliantly by Martin Sheen on NBC's Emmy-winning series The West Wing, was a wise and carefully thoughtful president for whom I wrote several episode scripts over 7 years of that series. And if I were writing the character of a stupid president in a script, I would simply have had the stupid president completely rely on a smart White House staff and a smart cabinet and just hide behind those people. And absolutely, and I mean absolutely, never talk to the press, because a stupid president's stupidity would be immediately exposed by the White House press corps. And on that point, I would have been very wrong, because it turns out the stupidest presidency in American history has the stupidest White House press corps in American history, as far as we can tell. And the press corps have become accessories, as they proved again today. No one could have imagined that if we get the stupidest president in history, we would also get the stupidest White House press corps collectively in history. But that is where we are. Some individual members of the White House press corps, and I want to stress this, remain excellent at their jobs. But they frequently don't get to ask Donald Trump a question in the elbow-to-elbow question competition that occurs when Donald Trump invites them into the Oval Office, or, as it was today, in the cabinet room. And it was the first time the Trump cabinet has met since Elon Musk left his position that wasn't actually a cabinet position, but that granted him a seat at the table in Trump cabinet meetings, absurdly, which those Trump cabinet meetings have consistently been the most ridiculous cabinet meetings in the history of the cabinet. Today, Donald Trump's accessories were allowed into the room to ask some questions. The White House press corps have become accessories in more than one sense. There is the criminal law concept of accessories, and there is the fashion notion of accessories. Donald Trump turns White House reporters into both versions of that word, accessories. He treats them like handbags or cufflinks, ornaments that he flashes around to pretend, and only pretend, that he is openly communicating about what he is doing in his workday, when he never really answers questions. And so that is never true. And Donald Trump uses the press corps as accessories before and after the fact of his lies. Donald Trump uses White House reporters to evade questions asked by other White House reporters. He plays them for clowns, and they have no idea how to resist it. And I have to admit, if I were in the White House press corps, I'm not sure I would figure out how to resist it, except to maybe yell out some question about Donald Trump lying about something, and then I wouldn't be in the White House press corps anymore. I would be shown out the door, and that would be the end of that. There was a moment in Donald Trump's playing with the press today that shows everything all at once. It shows Donald Trump's colossal stupidity in an exchange that he thinks shows how clever he is. Imagine how stupid you have to be as president of the United States to think that when asked a question about something important that you're supposed to know, your answer is, I don't know, why don't you tell me? There have been previous presidents who have been asked questions that they didn't know the answer to, which they should have known the answer to, and not one of them said, I don't know, why don't you tell me? Because none of them are as stupid as Donald Trump. Only Donald Trump could do that. And only Donald Trump has been able to beat down and humiliate White House reporters to the point where they take that for an answer meekly and shut up, which is exactly what happened today. When that White House reporter took that answer meekly, tried to mumble a follow-up, another White House reporter beside her immediately jumped in performing his role as an accessory after the fact of Donald Trump's stupidity, to offer Donald Trump a complete change of subject, a completely different question, to run away from the question to which his idiotic answer was, I don't know, why don't you tell me? And the reporter who he asked, why don't you tell me, began to follow up. But the other White House reporter came in to rescue Donald Trump. And all of that happens in one flash in the cabinet room today. And not a single White House reporter is outraged. Not a single White House reporter raised a voice. And the White House reporter who got Donald Trump to say, I don't know, why don't you tell me, is the very same White House reporter who was always congratulated for being very aggressive, and that's the term they're always proud of, very aggressive with President Joe Biden. She never would have allowed Joe Biden to say to her, why don't you tell me, without an aggressive and very loud response to that, a raised voice, aggressive response to that. But it's Donald Trump now. And so the White House press corps has changed its own rules of behavior in order to continue to be allowed in the Trump White House. They're not allowed to do their jobs in the Trump White House, but they are allowed to be there, which apparently is all that matters to most of them, who have exhibited no shame whatsoever in the diminution of their status, their reduction to accessories by Donald Trump. Here is that moment when everything all at once happened today.
Putin is not treating human beings right. He's killing too many people. So we're sending some defensive weapons to Ukraine, and I've approved that.
So who ordered the pause last week?
I don't know. Why don't you tell me?
I think that's a question for the
Go ahead.
Mr. President, on immigration, the Secretary, the Agriculture Secretary, did say this morning that undocumented workers would not be covered by any amnesty of who are working on farms.
And we were off to immigration. Donald Trump obviously thought he was being very clever with the why don't you tell me, wise guy question. There is not another president in our history who would think there was anything clever about that, because there isn't. It was a confident version of Donald Trump's rank stupidity. Why don't you tell me? Donald Trump thinking he's showing how tough and defiant he is of reporters with that response. Who ordered the pause of weapon shipments to Ukraine last week was actually the best question asked in the cabinet room today. And it figured into CNN reporting tonight about the paused arms shipment. CNN reports Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth did not inform the White House before he authorized a pause on weapons shipments to Ukraine last week, according to 5 sources familiar with the matter, setting off a scramble inside the administration to understand why the halt was implemented and explain it to Congress and the Ukrainian government. President Donald Trump suggested on Tuesday that he was not responsible for the move. Asked on Tuesday during a cabinet meeting whether he approved of the pause in shipments, Trump demurred, saying only that the U.S. would continue to send defensive weapons to Ukraine. Pressed again on who authorized the pause, Trump replied, I don't know. Why don't you tell me? 2 of the sources attributed Hegseth's not informing the White House to the fact that he has no chief of staff or trusted advisors around him that might urge him to coordinate major policy decisions better with interagency partners. Not another question in the cabinet room by members of the White House press corps today was worth asking. And some of the questions came from the Trump-worshiping reporters who have been added to the White House press corps by Donald Trump. And so the whole concept of a White House press corps has been corrupted by Donald Trump even before the non-corrupt members of the White House press corps have decided to use their talking to pets voices instead of the screaming level that they could reach at Joe Biden directly and at his White House press secretary. And so that is how the stupidest president in history can face the White House press corps with ease. It's very rare for Donald Trump to get even slightly nervous by something raised by the White House press corps, but it happened today when a reporter asked the Attorney General sitting at the table in the cabinet room about the Epstein files, at which point Donald Trump interrupted with a sudden concern for the now 111 people known to have been killed in flooding in Texas last weekend, and the additional 173 who tragically remain missing and unaccounted for as of tonight. To that Epstein question, aimed at the Attorney General, Donald Trump interrupted and said, "Are you still talking about Jeffrey Epstein? This guy has been talked about for years. You're asking, we have Texas, we have this, we have all of the things, and there are people still talking about this guy, this creep? That is unbelievable. Do you want to waste time? Waste time?" Donald Trump is the only president of the United States in history who was caught many times by witnesses and photographers partying with a child rapist who killed himself in prison. And so, yes, there will be questions about Jeffrey Epstein, even from the White House press corps, especially when people Donald Trump has appointed to his administration spent years claiming that there were all sorts of incriminating bits of information in the Epstein files that needed to be revealed to the public, which now don't need to be revealed to the public, according to the Trump Attorney General. And as to wasting time, Donald Trump's longest statement in the cabinet room today was to describe the cabinet room. Donald Trump spent more time describing the room where all the reporters were standing and could see for themselves than any other subject that was raised in that room today. He talked about all the presidential portraits that he has added to the cabinet room, among other things. And each one of those portraits got much more talk time in the room than Jeffrey Epstein did. And of course, time was no concern of Donald Trump's when he was rambling incoherently and saying things like, "Those machines flew for 37 straight hours. They didn't stop. They went skedaddle." You know what the word skedaddle? It means skedaddle. They dropped the bombs and somebody said, "Skedaddle. Let's get the hell out of here." And 3 sentences later, after the skedaddle business, Donald Trump was mentioning Hunter Biden's bedroom. That's in a discussion with the press where Donald Trump is concerned, he says, about how much time a response about the Epstein files might take. Donald Trump embarrassed himself today, as only Donald Trump can, when talking about what the missing almost cabinet member did in government, Elon Musk. Donald Trump was asked, "This, I think, is the first cabinet meeting that Elon Musk has now, since Elon Musk has been in special employee in government, he's not here anymore. He's now saying that he's going to create a third party. Are you worried about the impact that that could have?" That was the question. Donald Trump said, no, he's not worried. And then Donald Trump was asked by the same reporter, "Are you second guessing any of the cuts that the Department of Government Efficiency made?" Those cuts were all made by Elon Musk using Donald Trump's authority to make those cuts. So those cuts were really made by Donald Trump. That's how it works in a presidency. And Donald Trump said in response to that question, "We could have done it differently. I would have done it differently." Again, no president in history, when explaining something that his administration has done, has ever said, "I would have done it differently." A sane president could not say that, because a sane president would know that he did it. It was President Harry Truman who famously said, "The buck stops here," meaning the president is responsible for everything done by the presidency and everyone working for the presidency. And so Donald Trump is the first president to sit in the cabinet room and say to reporters, "I would have done it differently," when discussing something he did. And it takes a mind that is surrounded by a thick wall of stupidity to come up with a statement like that as president of the United States. "I would have done it differently." Donald Trump became the first president in history to use the word bullcrap, and I just cleaned that up, publicly in the cabinet room. And I can tell you, in the meetings in the cabinet room that I attended when I was working in the Senate and President Clinton was president, I never heard a word like that in the cabinet room, not because we weren't all capable of using that word and might have used that word somewhere else during the day, but because we were all in a room that brought to us a sense of decorum, a place which was the first place, the first room where President Franklin Delano Roosevelt had his very first discussion of America's involvement in World War II after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. That's the cabinet room. The cabinet room, like the Oval Office, is a room where you feel history surrounding you the second you cross the threshold, and you respect that history, unless you're Donald Trump. It was when Donald Trump was, for the first time, publicly saying what everyone else has always said about Vladimir Putin, which is that he's not always telling the truth about Ukraine. That's where Donald Trump decided to use that word bullcrap, which I refuse to use here. Because even here, the decorum that this program requires lives above the language of Donald Trump. And yes, it lives above language that I use when this camera and microphone are off, and that we all do. But language depends on place. Language depends on setting. Donald Trump doesn't know that. And because Donald Trump has the most extremely limited vocabulary of any president in history, along with the most limited intelligence, his frustration with Vladimir Putin came out in profanity because he has no sense of common decency, no sense of dignity, no respect for his surroundings, even though he's happy to talk at length about the presidential portraits he's decided to put on the wall of that room. Once again today, the White House press corps played the roles of perfect accessories to Donald Trump's lies about tariffs. Nothing, and I mean nothing, has enabled Donald Trump's lies about tariffs more than the now overwhelming, stultifying ignorance of the White House press corps that they display day in and day out every time Donald Trump says the word tariff in front of them. Early in the discussion with the press today, Donald Trump said the tariffs, as you know, are starting to come in at record levels. Tremendous amounts of money are coming into our country. He said that, and not one White House reporter said zero money is coming into the country from tariffs. Not one White House reporter chose today as the day to demonstrate that at least that one reporter knows that the money Donald Trump is talking about coming into our country is already here. It is in your wallet. It is in your bank account. It is in the bank accounts of American companies that are going to pay the tariffs in American dollars in the United States, which is the only place the tariffs can be paid. And those companies are going to pass on the cost of those tariffs to you in increased prices of the products that have been delivered from foreign countries, products that you need. And a product that is going to cost you more money because of Donald Trump's tariffs. And so, no, tremendous amounts of money are not coming into our country from tariffs, and never will come into our country from tariffs, and have never come into our country from tariffs, because that is impossible. And no White House reporter seems to know that. And the entire crew of White House reporters is stained now by the disgrace of White House reporters failing to point out that every time Donald Trump tells that lie, that it is a lie, and failing to ask him why he's telling that lie, failing to ask him why he cannot admit that tariffs imposed by Donald Trump are paid only by people in America with American dollars at the port of entry into the United States, that no foreign country has ever paid 1 penny of a tariff to the United States and never will, and it can never be that way, never has been, and never will work that way. No tariff has ever worked that way. White House press corps doesn't know that. At least, according to what they say, when they're given a chance, not one of them knows that. And toward the end of Donald Trump's discussion with reporters, Donald Trump gave them a history lesson during which, by their silence, they declined to reveal if a single one of them knows just how much dementia it takes to think that this Trump's story is American history, and this is what Donald Trump actually said. He said these words. They tried to bring back tariffs, but the whole thing was, this was after the Depression. That was one of the great misconceptions, is people like to say, oh, but it was during the, no. The country had a Great Depression, and then after the Depression, long after it started, they brought back tariffs to see if they could save it. No objection to that from White House press corps. No objections at all. That just sailed right through, sailed right by them. Viewers of this program know that these Smoot-Hawley tariffs were written by the Republican chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee and the Republican chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, both of which committees have jurisdiction over tariffs, and they got the tariffs in effect by history named after themselves, Senator Reed Smoot and Congressman Willis Hawley. They were signed into law by Republican President Herbert Hoover in 1930, and they caused and accelerated profoundly the Great Depression. The tariffs came before the worst of the Great Depression, and they worsened the Great Depression, and they were done and put into law entirely by Republicans. And Joe Biden, on his sickest day in the presidency when he had COVID and he could barely speak, could never have said anything as utterly ignorant of history as that lunacy Donald Trump spoke to the White House press corps about tariffs coming after the Great Depression. But Donald Trump can do it, and the White House press corps says nothing because they apparently know nothing about the subject of tariffs or the Great Depression, and who knows what else. The shame of the White House press corps and the Trump campaign press corps is their disgraceful failure to be able to confront Donald Trump about his lies about who pays the Trump tariffs. That is the simplest lie Donald Trump tells about tariffs, which has become a huge subject in his presidency that no White House press reporter is apparently capable of understanding. And Donald Trump has never been confronted on that lie by the White House press corps. If an individual member of the White House press corps does understand all of this about tariffs and has been unfairly blocked by the Trump people or colleagues in the room from being able to ask that question, I hereby apologize to that unknown reporter for lumping that reporter in with the genuinely disgraceful job that the larger group has done in their complete failure to penetrate that very simple lie. But the public knows. The public knows much better than the White House press corps that Donald Trump is lying about who pays the tariffs. On this, the American public, much, much smarter than your average White House reporter. A new poll shows 81% of Americans are very concerned or somewhat concerned about the impact of tariffs on their personal finances. And I have absolutely no doubt that 81% of the White House press corps do not know how tariffs work. And not one of those 81% of the public who do know, who are completely correct in their concern, have had any Trump at all, any help at all in comprehending the Trump tariffs from the White House press corps. What would happen? What would happen if Donald Trump turned on a White House press reporter and said, why don't you tell me about tariffs? Would they all be speechless? Or would Donald Trump's accessories finally find their voice? We'll be right back.